So, what if you could actually rewrite the story of your life? I mean, really go back and change the plot. Today, we're doing a deep dive into narrative therapy, and specifically a model from Dr. Arnott Vitanon that is just a revolutionary way of looking at how we heal the human mind. It's all about this idea that if you change your plot, you can literally change your life.
But to understand why this is such a big deal, you gotta start with the pretty harsh reality of what it replaced. The source material pulls no punches here. You see, for folks in a really severe psychological crisis, traditional methods often create this revolving door. Emergency services are amazing at stabilizing someone, for sure, but the relapse rate, it's just devastating. A person gets discharged, and weeks later, they're right back where they started, because the story, the underlying narrative that caused the crisis, was never actually addressed.
And this is where things get, frankly, incredible. Using this narrative approach, the results were just staggering. Over a 3-year period, working with patients who are at the highest risk, there were exactly 0 successful suicide attempts. Let that sink in. 0. None. This wasn't just about managing symptoms anymore. This was about fundamentally rewriting the plot of a person's life from the ground up.
Okay, so how on earth did they pull that off? Well, to get it, we have to take a detour that might seem a little weird at first. We actually have to start with art history. Yeah, you heard me right. Because it's in the evolution of art that we can see how our entire way of thinking in the West shifted. And that shift is what made all of this possible. You see, our whole idea of truth wasn't always the same. Back in the classical era, truth was this one big, external, perfect thing, like a law of the universe. But then that idea started to crack. You get Impressionism, and suddenly truth is about how you see things. Then Expressionism goes even deeper. Truth is about how you feel things. And finally, you get to Postmodernism, which just throws its hands up and asks, wait, is there even one single truth at all? This here is the perfect example. Look at the Vitruvian Man on the left. That's not a real dude. He's an idea, forced to fit into these perfect mathematical boxes. That's kind of like old school psychiatry. Here's the box, here's the diagnosis, now fit into it. But then you look at Expressionism on the right. The scream isn't about what the sky actually looked like. It's about expressing a feeling, an internal reality, and that's the only truth that matters. That first major crack in the wall of objective truth, it really came from the Impressionists. Think about Monet. He wasn't painting a bridge, he was painting the light hitting the bridge. He'd put these little dabs of pure color right next to each other on the canvas, and as this quote says so perfectly, the blending, the part that makes it a picture, that happens inside your brain. It was the first time we really admitted that the observer is part of creating reality. And here it is. This is the big leap. If an artist's internal feeling is a valid truth for their painting, then a person's internal feeling is a valid truth for their life. This is the absolute bedrock of narrative therapy. It means your pain, your experience, your story, it's real and it's valid, full stop. It doesn't matter what anyone else's objective reality says. Okay, so if we accept that our inner world is a valid reality, then the next question is, how is that reality built? In this next part, we're going to see how it's the stories we tell ourselves, our own internal narratives, that actually build the world we live in. A philosopher named Stephen Pepper really nailed this. He said we have 2 ways of thinking. The first is positional thinking. That's science. You ask, what is water? The answer is H2O. It's a fact. But then there's narrative thinking. That's life. You ask, what is water? And the answer could be a baptism, a flood, a memory of the ocean. It's all about meaning and context, and it's the only way to explain the wonderfully messy, illogical things we do as humans. And if we dig just a little deeper, all our thinking kind of falls into one of these 4 buckets. Now the first 2, mechanism and formalism, they're very objective. The mind is a machine, let's fix the broken part. But narrative therapy lives and breathes in the other 2, the subjective ones. Organicism, the idea that we're like seeds with potential, and the most important one of all, contextualism. Contextualism. This is the absolute cornerstone of Dr. Vitanant's work. The idea is simple, but so powerful. An event, the text, has no meaning on its own. The meaning is created entirely by the context you put around it. You know that classic story of the Chinese farmer? His horse runs away. Oh, what bad luck. Then the horse comes back with a dozen wild horses. What good luck. Then his son falls off one and breaks his leg. Oh, terrible luck. Then the army comes to town to draft all the young men, but they skip his son. What amazing luck. The event itself is just an event. The meaning changes completely every time the context shifts.
So we take this meaning-making machine and we build a plot for our lives. The plot is that story we have about the future. I'm going to be a great father, or I'm on track to be a successful lawyer. And that future story is what gives meaning to all the hard work we're doing right now. A crisis? A crisis is what happens when a real-life event comes in like a wrecking ball and just completely shatters that plot, leaving you feeling like nothing you're doing matters anymore. All right, we have the philosophy, we have the why. Now let's get into the how. We're going to look at the incredibly detailed, powerful tools this model uses to help people find a new context and completely rewrite those self-defeating stories. The first tool, and maybe the most important, is called externalization. The idea is right there in the quote. You are not the problem is the problem. So instead of saying, I am a depressed person, you learn to say, depression is an external thing that is trying to affect me. This isn't about dodging responsibility, it's about giving yourself your power back. Think about it. You can't fight who you are, but you can absolutely fight off an invader. So often, when someone is in crisis, their story is just one single track of failure playing on a loop. The therapist's job is to become a kind of narrative archaeologist. They dig through the person's past, looking for a sparking moment. This is a tiny, overlooked exception to the rule, a time when the problem wasn't there, or when a moment of strength shined through. They find that one little spark and they use it as the seed to grow a whole new, much more powerful story. Now, for really deep chronic pain, there's this incredible technique called mental time travel. It's a way to bypass all our intellectual defenses and get right to the source code. It works like this. The therapist has you find the physical feeling of the pain, that guilt in your chest, that shame in your stomach. And your brain can actually follow that feeling, that specific neural pathway, all the way back to the moment in childhood where it was first installed. Then, your adult self can step in and give that child's memory a compassionate reality check. And in that moment, it's like an instant software patch for the soul. The old, corrupted program gets updated, just like that. So the theory is fantastic, but what does this actually look like with real people in a real crisis? Let's walk through two incredibly detailed case studies from the source material that show exactly how this all comes together. First up, a successful contractor. His entire identity, his whole life's plot, was about being a provider for his family. Then, boom, a terminal cancer diagnosis. His plot was shattered. He felt like a failure. But the therapist found a sparking moment. His young child was conceived only after a very special, sacred prayer. That one detail changed the entire context. Suddenly, his new plot wasn't I am a failure who is dying. It became I am a heroic father on a sacred mission to make every last moment with my family count. Same facts, totally different story. The second case is a top law student whose self-worth just completely collapsed after her boyfriend cheated on her. She felt so worthless, she attempted suicide multiple times. Her plot was that of a victim. So the therapist used externalization. They reframed infidelity not as her personal failing, but as a societal problem. This gave her power back. Her new plot wasn't, I got dumped. It was, I chose to leave a person of low character to protect my future. See the shift? She went from passive victim to active hero of her own story. And what both these stories show is the ultimate goal here, to shift a person's core sense of self. The source material uses this great metaphor. It's about moving from the fragile sea lion self, the part of us that's always performing for applause, terrified of being abandoned, to the resilient prince or prince self, which has a secure internal sense of its own value and is focused on its purpose. And this brings us right back to where we started. All of these incredible clinical outcomes, turning a terminal illness into a heroic mission, they're only possible because of that philosophical shift we talked about at the beginning. Once you accept that reality is a subjective story, not a fixed fact, then as the quote says, anything becomes possible. So if you remember just one thing from this entire explainer, please let it be this. Your life is a narrative. It's a story. And because it's a story, built from text and context, it is not set in stone. It is entirely 100% changeable. You have the power to alter the context, and when you do that, you can change the entire plot. And that leaves us with one last provocative thought. And this question isn't for some patient in a crisis. It's for you. It's for me. It's for all of us. Take a hard look at the stories you tell yourself every day, especially the ones that hold you back, and ask yourself, what is one self-defeating story that you could find a new context for and start to update today? The pen is in your hand.